Hello and welcome to episode 20 of the Nostalgia Bubble podcast, the show where two lifelong best friends celebrate the movies that they love. I'm one of your hosts, Shuggy, an amateur film reviewer and nerd.
And I am Nye, Shuggy's brother from another mother.
Hey, this one's true.
Yeah, I think this was probably the most accurate one I've said so far.
Yeah, you're basically my little brother. Both in age and in height.
Indeed.
Anyway, it was your pick for a movie this week, and you went with Stand By Me.
I did, yeah. So this is a film that I hadn't seen in years. I'd probably only watched it a few times. And yeah, I had kind of quite a vague memory of watching it, but knowing that I really wanted to watch it again. I would love to hear your initial thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I have never seen this movie before, and it's so iconic. You know, I knew like loads of the parts of it. I knew obviously the train track scene. I knew the junkyard scene with the dog. It's stuff that gets referenced a lot.
Yeah.
I also have a thing where these kind of like huge 80s cultural milestones don't necessarily hold up when you watch them as an adult in like the 2000s.
Right.
Goonies, not a fan. Which might be slanderous to say. We're going to get hate comments for that. Like E.T., I don't love it. Again, but that one, you know, there's so many E.T. rip-offs, so, you know. Stand By Me, 100% delivers. Yeah, this film is great.
I love this film. It was so nice to watch it back and having vague memories just kind of being reignited and reinvigorated. It was just a really pleasant experience.
Yeah.
The film itself is very up and down emotionally, you know, but yeah, I mean, I understand now why I enjoyed it when I was a kid. And it's so nice, especially after so shortly following Mystery Men and revisiting a film that maybe didn't quite live up to my memories of it. It's so nice to kind of watch a film that, you know, still holds some real weight when you watch it.
I will say, Mystery Men has come out at this point, and I don't think we've had a film that's had so many of like my friends in like their 30s come out and go, I adore that film.
I did notice there
maybe
were a
this
lot
will
of
challenge
comments that said that they loved the film. So I'm glad that someone was in my corner. And yeah, I think, you know, we kind of mentioned that we thought that was a bit of a cult classic in a way. But yeah, it was really nice to watch this film and just love it for being a great film.
Yeah, I completely agree. I knew people talked about River Phoenix in this film as well, but my word was I blown away.
Yeah.
His performance as Chris.
He was fantastic. This was actually something that I kind of kept being amazed by.
He's so young.
He's so young, but he acts like an adult. Like his acting ability is like it's that of a professional already at that age, you know, and it's nuanced, you know, it's believable, and for somebody at that age to be able to act in that way was just brilliant. Yeah.
It's so sad that we were robbed of like all the potential performances he could have given. What a wonderful performer.
Yeah. It kind of makes the performance even more bittersweet, and I guess especially in the context of the film and the storyline itself. You know, I'm sure we'll get into it, but you know, it's about a kid who has been killed in an accident, and the recollection of this story of these friends that go to find the body, and this sort of memorial almost is triggered by the death of one of these kids as an adult, who is River Phoenix's character. And I mean, retrospectively, you know, obviously at the time of the film there was no knowing, but it did kind of strike a chord with me that, you know, there was a really kind of poetic irony to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Right, I'm going to get into a bit of pre-production before we dive any deeper into the film. So it is, of course, based on Stephen King's 1982 novella, The Body. So one of the screenwriters, Bruce A. Evans, actually sent a copy of it to the wife of his writing partner, I can speak English, writing partner, Reynold Gideon, as a birthday gift for her. And Gideon and his wife, like, quickly they became huge fans, and they reached out to King's agent to try and negotiate the film rights. The response was $100,000 and 10% of the gross profits. The gross profits thing, like, that's what really was like, if we get studio backing, we can get him 100,000. 10% of the gross profits is a big margin for a studio to give away. And particularly as the film couldn't be made with any kind of bankable stars because it's all kids. So they shop it around and they get on a director, Adrian Lin, to try and help sell the project. He's well established at this point. Probably a bit less well known now, but yeah, I believe Flashdance, stuff like that. So, he was known at the time. The only kind of company that approved them was Embassy Pictures, and they managed to negotiate King down on like his percentage gross. They weren't particularly willing to meet Lin's salary, however, until Evans and Gideon eventually agreed to give up half their share of the project, which they did for Lin, who then he actually didn't end up directing the film because he'd promised himself a holiday after making 9.5 weeks. So
that's a work-life balance right there.
Yeah, I mean, he's got it sorted. He knew EA deserved a holiday, and he took his holiday. So then Rob Reiner kind of stepped on to direct, and he kind of just broken into the world of directing. He directed This Is Spinal Tap's his first movie, and The Sure Thing, which, kind of both comedies. So this was seen as kind of very outside what he was known for. But Rob Reiner, in the 80s into the early 90s, is just one of the best directors working. So as well as Spinal Tap and Stand By Me, he then made The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, Misery, and A Few Good Men. Like, that's an hell of a good run of films.
Yeah, I was going to say that it kind of took off from there, right?
Yeah, what a guy. So Reiner's initial reaction to the script was that it had a lot of promise, but it kind of lacked focus. And it was him who kind of realised the film should focus on Gordy more than just like any of the four boys, focusing on one with a main character. And that was because he kind of identified to Gordy. Rob Reiner is the son of a comedy legend, Carl Reiner. So, he was kind of used to being in his father's shadow. And obviously Gordy is kind of in his brother's shadow in the film.
Yeah.
And then right before shooting was due to start, Embassy Pictures was sold to Columbia, who is a much more well-known studio these days still, and they were going to cancel the project until one of the co-owners of Embassy, Norman Lear, he actually stumped up $7.5 million of his own money to get the film completed because he had such faith in Reiner and the reworked script.
Wow.
Yeah, which is impressive stuff. Like, if someone believes in something that much, and ultimately he was right. Like, Stand By Me, classic. One of the big things Columbia were not a fan of was the title The Body.
Yeah, I thought that was a bit of a leap from the novella.
Yeah, they thought it sounded either like a sex film, a bodybuilding film, or another Stephen King horror. And it's Rob Reiner who comes up with Stand By Me, which is, of course, derived from the title of a Benny King song, the one that plays at the end of the film. Mm-hmm. And apparently it was just the least unpopular title that anyone came up with.
Oh, right, okay. So it was never really anything to do with the writing itself.
Yeah, it was kind of just the one that, didn't have people going, that really sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was still pretty apt for the film. You could definitely come away from the film thinking that, like, understanding why it was called that.
Yeah. Obviously, one of the big elements that was important was the casting, and Will Wheaton said that the whole success of the film was down to Reiner's casting of the four kind of main characters. He said that basically everyone was kind of the characters they played. He described himself as kind of a awkward, nerdy guy, and that River Phoenix really just was that charismatic and lovable. And one of the big things that Reiner did was, rather than just start shooting right away, he spent 2 weeks having these four guys basically playing theatre games together, so as they could build up this friendship and camaraderie between them, so that everything you see of them just kind of messing around with each other. These were like one take stuff because they were just genuinely friends. Yeah, that's kind of all I got on pre-production.
All right then.
Yeah, so we kind of obviously we start in kind of present day and then flash back and meet all these characters. I think it's very quick to learn that all of these four boys have very tough home lives. Obviously we learn Teddy has this kind of abusive father who's seriously burnt his ear. And it's not until later in the film we kind of learn that his father has mental health issues, which you imagine is brought on by his time in the war.
Yeah, there is some nod to sort of PTSD there, isn't there?
Yeah, particularly kind of the end of the junkyard scene where the owner is talking about it. Obviously, Vern, his brother's kind of part of Ace's gang of the antagonists of the film. And then obviously Chris, where the introduction to Chris in the narration is everyone knew Chris would turn out bad because of the family he came from. Even Chris knew it. And it's right from the start, and you get him, he's gambling and smoking, 12-year-old kid, and you are meant to think, I assume you're meant to think that, this guy's not going to achieve much in life. And that's what everyone thinks, and it's immediately they're trying to put you in this headspace to subvert that later. He is set up as this one kind of character, but he is actually one of the sweetest, most caring guys for the people that he loves.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that kind of really struck me about not just the character but the relationships as well, was that his relationships with the people around him felt really kind of emotionally mature. And I think that's why the casting of River Phoenix was so brilliant, because he complemented that with his acting. And yeah, I think you're completely right. Like you go into this thinking, okay, great, this guy's gonna be a troublemaker. He's gonna be the one that puts everyone in difficult positions, but actually he's the linchpin that keeps everybody together. And he is one of the most, if not the most sensible person in the group.
Mm. And you get like kind of Gordy's dad saying he doesn't like him, he's a thief, he stole that milk money. And then when you actually hear the truth of the milk money story, oh my God, that scene breaks your heart.
Yeah. I mean, it touches on the topic of socioeconomic inequality and, the people's starting points in life, and how prospects and their relationships with people around them are coloured by where they're from and the injustice of that. And you see firsthand, and it's so brilliantly depicted and portrayed, how that can just destroy somebody's life and somebody's self-esteem. And again, like, I mean, it was so fantastically done.
So for those who haven't seen the film, obviously we learned that he did steal the money, and he's saying everyone knows I did, but would you have believed that I took it back and handed it in to a teacher and that she just never returned it, and she went and took that money and bought herself a new dress, and she knew she could get away with it because of how everyone viewed him, because of his social status. And River Phoenix, again, like, I'm going to spend most of this podcast eulogizing him because he breaks down in that scene, because he's the one, throughout the film he's pushing Gordy to you're the one who can get out of this place, you're the one who can be more. But he doesn't believe it in himself because no one else believes it in him because of who his family is.
I read there was kind of a little tidbit of information on this when I was kind of looking at River Phoenix and his experience on this film. And in this scene they kept retaking it, and Raina told him, you can do better, I think you can do better than that last take. And he said, I want you to think of a time that somebody has made you so angry that you've cried. And happened in one take, and that's the take that you see in the film. And for for a kid to have that understanding and be that open to emotion like that is, I mean, when you talk about acting, you say it's just playing, and there's this idea that you lose the capacity and the freedom to do that when as you grow up. But so by that logic, a kid would be more adept to kind of being able to connect with those sort of emotions. But for that emotional maturity, for me, I was just, it was amazing. And
Yeah, he's got to understand kind of the complex emotions that's going through this character. A situation that he's probably never been in. He's a guy who's breaking into the film industry. He's not someone who has no prospects in life because of where who his family are. He's got to, for a kid, he's got to understand how that is. And I think that's also credit to Reiner's direction. For you say he was pushing him, and he kind of hit on this like way of describing it that he could understand so cleanly that he could then get it in one take. I think it's credit to both of them.
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, being able to communicate with a young actor like that, and I mean to be able to communicate with anyone like that as a
Yeah,
director is a real skill, um, and especially when it comes to working with such sort of extreme emotions. You're asking an actor to be as vulnerable as they can. It's a big ask. It's a big feat for a person to do, and to be able to bring that out not only at all but in one take, to be able to bring that out of a young actor is just phenomenal.
yeah,
So absolutely, that is testament to Reiner's ability. And we talk about this moment as something that is kind of exceptional for a young actor, and it is brilliant. It's really impressive, and it's something that it's easy to kind of revel in and easy to be impressed by. Um, but for me, like the consistency of that quality of acting throughout,
yeah,
even when it wasn't those moments where he was having a breakdown, the way that this was somebody trying to support his friend, and he was so understanding and so supportive, and like there's a real delicacy to those connections that you make with people, and to be able to play those convincingly, that for me is just as if not more impressive. To be able to watch River Phoenix put on a performance like that, which as I said is nuanced, and it's subtle, and it's almost modest, like I watched this film and I thought, I want this kid to be my friend. I need him in my corner,
yeah. He is 100%.
for that to be completely and utterly portrayed by such a young actor is just amazing.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you've just said. Yeah, you've nailed it. I'm really interested to hear, because obviously the only character you don't kind of have explained who they are to you is Gordy, because you got him explaining who everyone else is. So what are your kind of initial impressions of Gordy?
Um, I think you're kind of led. Obviously, you immediately realise that he is the narrator.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so you're led to believe that he sees this story objectively. I think he is somebody who is telling this story from the outside almost. Even when you understand that he's part of the film, he's part of this narrative and this storyline. I think you kind of led to believe that he is seeing this from a much more removed perspective,
Okay.
and then you kind of learn that his brother died in an accident, and he has his own troubles with kind of his parents not really communicating with him, um, and you see how much he depends on these people around him.
I think 100% on that point, because for me the thing that strikes me is how comfortable he is when he's with these three. But as soon as he's having to interact with anyone else, apart from like the couple of flashbacks with his brother, you just get a sense of how reserved he is as a character. Even when they stop to buy food, he's kind of very quiet and he just lets the guy in the shop do all the talking. When the bullies stop him and Chris, he doesn't do anything. He just said, Ace takes his brother's hat that he gave him, and he's not the one to try and fight back anyway. And even kind of in the flashbacks with his family, with his brother, when you see him interacting with his family, and you go, oh, you can see why this is the case, because his dad very clearly only cares about Denny. Oh, speaking of Denny, what a John Cusack's in 3 scenes and he's great. What a brother. He's very like Chris.
It made me feel like a bad brother. I was like, I need to step my game up.
We can't be comparing ourselves to Denny. He just seemed like a great guy.
Yeah,
you get this kind of sense. Obviously, the initial scene you see of Gordy is him looking for something, and his mum kind of not responding, and his dad's very curt with him, and doesn't give any answers. But you see that even before Denny dies, his dad wasn't that interested because he only cared about Denny being good at football.
Yeah, and I think that, having someone like Denny be, such a prominent figure, especially just in such a short period of time in the film, really emphasizes the loss that he's experiencing as well.
Yeah, and I think his kind of central journey in the film is that he's not been able to process his grief over Denny's death because his family are so withdrawn from him. They're not there to support him. And obviously, this group of friends, they're all kind of, it's a very classic kind of view of young boys in the 80s where, they're not showing emotion at all and they're just insulting each other. There's the great line of, being able to insult someone's mother, get you lots of points or something. Akin to that, that's kind of the attitude. And he's not able to process his death.
Yeah, I also quite like the idea that, these 3 friends of his almost represent different elements of that grief and that processing. You've got obviously Chris, who is the kind of emotional support. He's there to help him get through it. Chris recognizes when he's struggling and he's there to talk him through the issues he's dealing with. You've got Teddy, who's the adventurous one, who kind of encourages and pushes him to get out of his shell and to be a bit daring and courageous and think a little bit more outside the box. And then you've got Vern, who is pretty much there to make him laugh. Vern is there as the kind of comic relief in this film. And you see that gradually these 3 things bring more out of Gordy in the way that, they encourage him to cry, they encourage him to tell stories, they encourage him to stand up for himself. All of these things happen as you go through the film. And it seems really kind of poignant that these 3 friends represent these 3 different parts of grieving and moving on and end up combining to bring something out of him, that you end up seeing that by the end of this film, when he's finishing the writing, he is somebody who is content and happy, and he is expressive and he is loving. And that for me just kind of got rounded up at the end and beautifully.
Man, I love that point. That's so good. Yeah, they 100% are these kind of 3 different areas of emotional support. Yeah, that's fantastic. I also hit on a point you mentioned in there of, they're telling him it's okay to cry and stuff. This is the 80s, this is the era of, Top Gun and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. Here's a film telling you, it's okay to cry. It's breaking kind of that toxic masculine tropes and saying, no, it's okay to be, this kind of person. You don't have to just act tough, which I think is pretty revolutionary for the era.
Yeah, and I think you see all four of them fighting with this,
Yeah,
and you could go through them all again, and you could say one of them is fighting with, being the fall guy, and one of the
yeah, yeah,
but you see them all fighting with this and struggling with this and working together and kind of being able to externalize and challenge each other and talk about these things. And I think that there's a really brilliant dynamic between those four and, Ace and Billy and Eyeball and that gang. And it's almost like they are the new generation that are kind of moving away from this, macho, toxic masculinity that has been so heavily instilled in these older boys, and you see it demonstrated in the parents, in all the stories that you hear
yeah,
coming through the kids that about the parents. And there's just kind of a really nice sort of contrast between Gordy and Chris and Teddy and Vern, and then the older lot, which it just sheds so much light on the fact that these four younger kids are really battling with this. And again, like, if nothing else, it just proves the emotional maturity of these kids.
yeah. I like the comparison with Ace's gang. Like, I mean, you've got them, carving scar tattoos on one another with like blades and stuff, and also just the direct comparison between kind of Ace as the leader of the gang and Chris as the leader of these four. Chris is there, caring and compassionate, talking Gordy through his issues. When Teddy kind of has his breakdown at the junkyard over what the owner's saying about his dad, and Vern, tries to start the singing again, Chris is the one who's like, no, this isn't the time. Like, he needs his time to be upset. It's okay. And then you've got Ace is obviously, completely domineering of his supposed friends, saying have very happily kill any of them at, different points. They're clearly scared to, bring up some information with him. I mean, I don't want to get, political, but, he's almost like a fascist leader of that group. He is, I rule this little gang with an iron fist. You guys are just my followers. Whereas Chris is, we are a group. We are friends. We're here to lift each other up.
I think what's really interesting as well is, like, when you look at the nature of being a leader, and I'm obsessed with dogs, and you're probably wondering where this is going, and there's this idea that, like, in a wolf pack, the leader,
The whole alpha beta thing.
yeah, but there is no struggle to be a leader. What the leader does is they support the rest of the group, and that is what the alpha male does. And
Oh, what a complete misunderstanding of the term alpha by the whole toxic masculine
right,
community
exactly.
of the internet then.
Yeah, exactly. So an alpha male is not there to create a beta and make a beta feel like they are not worthy of being an alpha. An alpha is there to drive from the back. And you see this so obviously demonstrated in the difference between these two groups of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it kind of two depictions of what it means to be a leader,
Yeah.
and you see the way that the people around them respond to them, and as you say, Ace was commonly said that he was willing to kill members of his gang,
Yeah.
and then you've got Chris, who's so ready to die for members of his gang.
Yeah, 100%.
And yeah, just a really kind of nice plain contrast between the two, and obviously the joy of watching the moral high ground being taken by the younger generation.
Yeah. You get kind of that scene where Ace and the other car with his gang members are kind of like trying to race down the road, and someone's a truck's coming the other way, and there's this whole scene of Ace where he's refusing to budge. It's a game of chicken, and he essentially forces the other car to drive off the road, and he wins. And it's kind of like, I get the point of that scene is meant to be, he's not afraid. He's gonna pursue what he's doing relentlessly. He wants to win at all costs. He's not scared of being hurt, which is then obviously when you get to the last scene turned around. But I think what you really get in that scene is that, that kind of, again, it's about that kind of toxic level of competition. He has to prove himself the best in his group at all times. And he was willing to crash a car with two of his supposed friends in, and himself, to prove that he's the best.
Yeah, and I think kind of ultimately it's underpinned by this level of self-destruction,
Yeah. I think we have to talk about the bridge scene because it's so iconic. But right before that, there is one of the funniest moments in the film for me. Again, touch with a really lovely one where Gordy and Chris are talking. And, Chris is, saying how they're going to end up splitting up in high school because Gordy's, he's the smart one. The rest of them are stupid. And then you cut to the other two having this conversation over who'd win in a fight, Mickey Mouse or Superman.
Yeah, I loved this scene as well. This was a scene that really kind of struck a bit of a chord with me. I think it was just so brilliantly narrated.
I also think you kind of see, because we had a flashback where the first time Gordy's writing is mentioned is by Denny, who's saying that, he really loved what he wrote and he's supporting him. And this is kind of the second time it's mentioned, and it's Chris saying, you could be a real writer. And you see that kind of Chris has almost taken on that brother role, like, fully at this point. Like, he has taken on Denny's mantle as almost the big brother to Gordy. They're the two people who are encouraging.
Yeah, I really like that, actually. I hadn't really thought of that. I mean, I knew that there were sort of parallels, but I hadn't really noticed that they were blatantly and purposely kind of written into the film in such close proximity to one another.
Yeah. Right, I think we have to talk about this kind of bridging, because I think it is the most iconic moment of the film. It's referenced so much. There's a Family Guy kind of parody of Stand By Me, and this is like the major point of it. I do want to say a quick bit of behind the scenes stuff. So they actually had kind of 4 female stunt doubles with like really closely cropped hair playing the boys at points. When they did have the boys running, they had like a little trick camera to make the train appear closer than it was in those kind of shots where it's behind them and they're running towards the camera. And apparently there just wasn't, like, the boys weren't scared at all, and they just couldn't show the fear. And they spent like a week trying to film this whole sequence.
Oh, really? Wow.
And at one point, Rob Reiner's saying, like, our crew are pushing this dolly along this track. They're sick of it. If you're not worried that the train's going to kill you, be worried I'm going to kill you. And he said at that point, that's when they got scared.
That's brilliant. It's just a brilliant scene.
Yeah, I mean, the danger's there because we've learnt that the body that they're trying to find was killed by a train. He was hit off the tracks. We see Teddy, wants to dodge that train earlier. And again, Chris, being the kind of responsible one, pulls him off the tracks.
Yeah.
And so kind of the danger of the train has been established. And again, you talk about Teddy being kind of the daring one. He's the one who's just like, yeah, we're doing this, when everyone else is kind of like, should we walk to a bridge that's 4 miles away? He's like, nope, we're just crossing. And he just goes, and kind of they all have to follow. And I love kind of, you see just how smart kind of Gordy is here, because he's testing the rail to feel something.
Yeah.
And yeah, it kind of just adds that sense. And then Vern drops the comb that he's brought, that he's made a big deal on, in case they get in the paper, which forces him and Gordy to lag behind the other two, which means that they're the ones in danger. And I think this is kind of a moment of Gordy really stepping up when he finally saves Vern at the end. Like, he realises they're not going to make it and makes that snap decision to throw him and Vern off the side of the bridge.
Yeah. I think there's something interesting to be said for, the fact that the two of them that get ahead and they're sort of most willing to take the risk are the two that come out the safest. And it's the two of them that are a lot more tentative, a lot more kind of
cautious,
yeah. They are the two that end up sort of having to literally run for their lives.
I will say Vern scrabbling across the bridge on like his hands and knees.
And then
It gave
deciding
me,
to do it faster.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it gave me big Donkey and Shrek crossing the bridge over the lava vibes.
Yeah, maybe that's a reference, you know.
But I mean, I wouldn't put it past Shrek.
Maybe it's a reference that we never picked up on.
I mean, yeah. I mean, there are so many things reference this, and we're going to get to my all-time favorite reference later. I think
Okay, great, great.
in the post-production.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we kind of get into, you mentioned earlier this campsite scene, and this kind of weird story Gordy tells about this bullied kid who makes himself sick at a pie eating contest to make everyone else sick. I'm going to be honest, fully honest here, I don't fully understand the purpose of this whole story.
Yeah, I can't really tell whether it was for like light relief from
Yeah.
the film. You know, it was sandwiched between a scary scene of them running from a train and then an emotional scene with Chris and Gordy. So I don't know whether it was there simply just to kind of add a bit of humour and lightheartedness to the film. This sort of brought out elements of this story, and you've set me on a path here now, so I'm like
Strapping in.
this story kind of does talk about it explores things of like these kind of quite toxic emotions of wanting revenge, of bullying, and of greed in a sense as well, and these are all things that these kids don't possess, like, yeah, they pick on Vern, but it's not kind of malicious in the same way. It's not intended to hurt him and upset him, and you don't really see that sort of level of malice and greed and that intention to hurt someone really from these people. And so you kind of see them really, it is nothing but a fantasy story to them, because they are so far removed from these horrible kind of emotions and characteristics and stuff. So that for me was, as well as it sort of being a bit of light relief for the story, was almost light relief for the characters, because they are so far from that. And these are things that you see in the other gang. Like, you see the self-destructive nature of Ace, and you see the bullying and the greed from all of them, and it's something that, yeah, just that was something that kind of, now that you've mentioned it, that's the way I might interpret it.
Yeah, that's a nice little interpretation, because I don't necessarily agree completely with it this needing to be the humorous break, because we have a couple of scenes after this of one of them kind of sitting around the campfire chatting, which is where that kind of infamous Pluto's a dog and Goofy's a dog,
Yeah.
but one of them is like a pet and one of them's like a person animal,
Yeah.
which is like just now a big part of pop culture conversation. And then I've also got the humorous them all standing watch at the campfire sequence and all their different reactions to it. So I think there is other comedic moments in there. Like, my kind of, I guess what the point was to actually show us Gordy's storytelling abilities. And I guess, as you were saying, this is where people kind of push him to do it, and actually his friends are supporting that, and they're can you tell us a story?
This is also a very good and very viable and a lot more simple response to that whole theory.
I think we can both be right.
I think it's possibly less is more in this situation, and you're probably right that actually all this is them trying to bring something out of Gordy and you having the chance to see it, and everything, all these other things that you've seen that have kind of been dropped in the story are either flashbacks or they are him in the present day, and none of it is about Gordy's imagination. So this is the chance that you actually get to see. This is the one thing
Yeah.
in the film that doesn't actually happen.
I think what I said might be sort of more why they included a story element in here, and yours might be why they included the particular kind of story that they did.
Maybe I might also be clutching at straws, but there's no wrong answer
Well,
when
that's
analysing this stuff, I guess.
that. Yeah, yeah. That's what film criticism is.
I'll keep telling myself that.
Exactly. And then I guess we kind of got to talk about when they find the body, and then Ace and his gang show up. Also, first off, we see it, very traumatically affect Gordy, and brings up kind of the trauma over Denny's death, and he breaks down, that he really misses him. This is, I think, his first time really processing it,
Yeah,
because he kind of, as I said earlier, his family aren't there to support him processing it because they preferred Gordy, at least his dad did. And he obviously has that nightmare at the campfire where his dad says at the funeral, it should have been you. And you don't know. I mean, honestly, with his father, that could have been an actual event, or it could have just been a nightmare. That is kind of his thought process. And again,
yeah. Well, he's
Chris
already
is,
said, "Why don't you have friends like Denny did?"
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, you're completely right. And what I was going to say is that this is the first time that you really see him openly grieve the loss of his brother. And
I mean, I think it
you've
probably is
seen
the
it
first time
building.
he has.
Yeah, and you see it building through the film. Like you see how kind of
Yeah.
concerned he is about going to look at the body, and maybe it is because he's aware that it might kind of set something off or might make him kind of confront what he has been trying to neglect confronting, similarly to his parents.
And I think that's kind of the whole purpose of them going to find this body. And, that's why focusing in on Gordy's such a good idea. Because he is the one who gets something out of it the most. By actually finding this body, he finally confronts his brother's death and how traumatized he is by it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point actually, that it's, although this journey is shared between the four boys, it's almost like every element of that journey, it encompasses exactly what Gordy is feeling and experiencing on a personal level. And the highs and lows of grieving, which are so brilliantly depicted through this film. And I think it does really come to a head when he sees the body. And I think I didn't remember that part of the film actually, and so it was quite a shock, it being so kind of blatantly displayed. And
Yeah.
it was quite harrowing, and yeah, for him to see it, and then you see all of these things, all these feelings he's been feeling for the whole film kind of explode out of him, just kind of brings you into that sort of
Yeah.
shock of seeing that. There's that moment of stillness. Like the one thing that did surprise me quite a lot was that at that point where they do focus on the face of the boy, it stays there for a long time, and
Yeah.
it seems to kind of it seems to sort of coincide with the stillness and that almost like that moment of like shock where you're just frozen and you can't move, and you don't, like, I don't know if you've ever experienced kind of being genuinely terrified or scared of something, but
A spider.
yeah. And like I've had moments where I've been scared, and like to the point where you just freeze and you're like, I don't know what to
Yeah.
do. And I feel like that was so well captured in the fact that you're focusing on this kid's dead face for several
Yeah.
seconds, and and then you cut to Gordy and you're focusing on his face, and he's still, you see everything bubbling, but he's still, you know, and it's all kind of going on inside his head, and then obviously it comes out later, but it's just kind of a really interesting approach, like in terms of the editing, and you know, it's been so well constructed around Gordy and his this lead up to seeing the
Yeah.
body, and then that moment, and then of course there's that kind of point after where it's almost like you've broken the dam and the tears come out, and it's, you know, it is almost like that was what it took.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't really talked about Will Wheaton, but he's phenomenal as well. He's great.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I haven't seen Will Wheaton in anything else other than other than The Big Bang Theory.
Okay, yeah.
But obviously, having like I knew him from the film, I just couldn't really remember his performance. Obviously, watching it as a young kid, I didn't kind of experience it in the same way,
Yeah.
and my priorities watching films were slightly different, I
Very
suppose.
different.
Yeah, but oh yeah, fantastic. I mean, for me, River Phoenix steals the show, but
Yeah,
you know,
100%.
there is, I mean, Will Wheaton does a bang up job, and
Yeah.
like I think it's kind of appropriate. Will Wheaton supports River Phoenix in that sense, and you know, you've got Chris supporting Gordy, and it feels like there's a real kind of connection between the two, not just as actors, but not just as characters, sorry, but as actors, and that goes back to what you were saying about how
Rob Reiner deliberately, you know, wanted that connection, and he got it.
yeah,
Again,
yeah,
great direction to make that decision to spend those 2 weeks forging these friendships.
yeah,
And then we
absolutely.
kind of get the big kind of the sense of growth as well in Gordy when Ace arrives, and again, you know, this time he's attacking Chris with a knife, and instead of just standing there quietly, Gordy pulls the gun that Chris has brought with him. And if this was like any kind of other 80s film, that moment of, are you going to shoot all of us? No, Ace, I'm just going to shoot you, would be like a badass one-liner. And it kind of is still, but it actually is just, it's the, I think, again, Wheaton, this is his kind of moment in the film, because his delivery on that, in this kind of quiet confidence that he hasn't had around anyone other than his three friends throughout the film, and suddenly he's got it confronting this, you know, gang leader, uber bully, really shows how far he's come in this, you know, in this trip to find the body.
Yeah, and I think, you know, with that one line in particular, and not only the delivery but also the kind of that tunnel vision on Ace makes you realize that he's probably not joking,
Yeah.
and he sort of ends up playing this role that you saw, and I think this is a really important moment, because this is a point where you see the switch between him and Chris, because
Yeah.
then there's the point where they return back to the town, and they're overlooking the town, and you know, Chris says, I'm never going to get out of here, and then it's Gordy's turn to support him, you know.
Yeah, and you learn Chris, in the end, he gets into, you know, university, college, or whatever they call it, and yeah, he ends up becoming a lawyer. And kind of, you know, when you learn, you know, at the start, you know, this guy Chris stabbed, and then you cut back and you meet him, you go, oh, he was probably, you know, stabbed in a fight somewhere. But you know, he's the one, and once you've seen the film, you know, you get 100% he's the guy who's always stepping in, caring for people. He was stabbed trying to break up a fight and, you know, help people. And yeah, this is Gordy's moment to support Chris, as you say. There are kind of moments before where, you know, he's encouraging him to apply for you know, college tests and stuff, but I think it's because of this kind of moment that, you know, Chris has seen Gordy step up and do something that he probably never thought he had in his locker. So Chris probably decides to do the same, and yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's a real sort of sad parallel between that moment where Ace pulls a knife on Chris and puts it to his neck, and then,
Yeah.
you know, then you kind of find out the details at the end of the film, and you're like, you're just kind of, it's quite harrowing and it's quite kind of shocking. And I guess, as I said before, even more so now that you know how River Phoenix's life went, and um, it's just, yeah, it just feels almost like a kind of an extra little level and layer to this film. The fact that the writing has been able to construct these characters and this story, and it's almost like they have kind of nuances. I'm using that word way too much today, but they have nuances within the story. It's almost like a
Yeah.
kind of a Russian doll, and it's a really sort of beautiful, rounded moment, where it kind of reflects something from previously in the film, but it doesn't underline the entire film. It's not kind of what the film is about. It's just sort of a nice little detail.
Yeah. So the last thing I'm going to bring up before I get into some post-production very quick is this nearly has one of the great iconic closing lines, except that it's written on the computer screen rather than spoken. But I never had any friends like the ones I had when I was 12. Jesus, does anyone is one of the iconic lines.
Yeah, and there's definitely an element of truth in there, isn't there? And
Yeah,
I think what's really nice is that he spends that moment reflecting, and kind of this whole story is about nostalgia, but there's those moments like around the campfire, or when they're in the swamp, where they're going, I'm
yeah.
young, I'm in the prime of my youth, I can do, and like there's, although this whole film is a memory and it's about him kind of experiencing these nostalgic moments, you know, they spent that time really fully understanding the the kind of joy that they were experiencing at that point at that moment. So
Yeah.
it's really nice that you've watched a film where consistently throughout they go, I'm going to enjoy this moment. I don't want to leave. I'm going to stay here. I'm young. And then, it's almost like crossing the T's and dotting the I's when you see him when he's older, and he goes, that was a brilliant time. And it's, yeah, lovely that they also appreciated it during the film.
Yeah. I'll very quick bit of post production. I don't have much here. Film was big box office success. It earned over $50 million on an $8 million budget. There was a couple of notable bad reviews on the opening, but it generally very strong critical response, and obviously has gone on to have a great legacy. I'll get into in a sec. It didn't earn many awards, but it got a few nominations, most notably Best Adapted Screenplay at the Oscars. As I say, the legacy of this film is fantastic. It's one of those kind of quintessential 80s movies and kind of quintessential coming of age movies. Obviously, it has been referenced a huge number of times across film and television. One of the ones I do want to mention is there's an episode of Stranger Things called The Body, which is particularly important because all the young actors in Stranger Things were asked to read scenes from Stand By Me in their auditions. There is a reference to this film that is the greatest reference ever that I never got because I haven't played these in ages. But in
Okay.
the original Pokemon games, both the Japanese and the English versions,
Yeah.
so that's red, green, blue, and yellow, and their remakes, if you interact with the TV in your home at the start that your mum is watching, it says there's a movie on TV, four boys are walking on railroad tracks, I better go too.
That's brilliant.
And I've just learnt that my favourite games have a Stand By Me reference in them.
Amazing. That must have been the cherry on the cake for you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm a
nice.
Pokemon nerd.
Love that. Well, I'm glad that this pick provided that as well.
Yeah, so what are your final thoughts on the film now?
I I loved it. It was so nice to kind of go back and watch something that was as good as I remember it being, and also to kind of experience new things from it. Um, it was delightful. It was sensitive. It was sweet. It was funny. It was everything that you want from a film about, young kids growing and becoming more than they are. And, it's, for me, it is pretty much everything that a coming of age film should be.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is, one of the granddaddies of coming of age films, and it completely lived up to its reputation for me. A lot of those 80s films don't necessarily, but yeah, this one, it's as good as Build. Performances are great. Rob Reiner's direction is great. River Phoenix is out of this world for, this guy in his early teens probably. Yeah, I adored it. It completely delivered, and I'm really glad you picked it. I really, really loved getting to do it.
Oh, good. Me too. And yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Cool.
Yeah.
So that brings us on to your pick for the next episode, which will be...
So there's no Nazis in this one for sure.
Okay.
But it is a sci-fi film that involves fighting, essentially a fascist government.
Okay.
It's going to be a slightly weird one. So it's the film Serenity.
Right.
Which is the film sequel to the show Firefly. But I'm not saying you have to watch the show Firefly, because the first time I ever saw this film was before having ever heard of the show Firefly.
Okay.
So I'm
cool.
very interested to hear your point of view coming to it from kind of the same place I did.
Okay, cool. I'm looking forward to giving it a watch. I think you've spoken about Firefly to me before.
It's a great show.
I think you may have bought me the first season.
There's only one season.
Yeah, and
it was sadly cancelled.
I think you bought it for me at some point.
Okay.
I don't know if I got around to watching it. It's probably sitting on my shelf somewhere.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm looking forward to it.
So again, it's a Joss Whedon film, so we're not going to be talking about him too much. I am instead going to be focusing on one of my favourite characters ever, Mal Reynolds, which is the kind of lead character of the show and film. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into that.
Great stuff. Looking forward to it. I think this is probably one of our first sci-fi films that we've done.
I mean, we had Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, Star Wars I'd kind of say is sci-fi / fantasy.
I'd say science fantasy. We had,
Yeah.
Obviously Jurassic Park has sci-fi elements, I guess.
Yeah.
No.
I think, this is probably the first out-and-out sci-fi film we've had. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to it, mate.
All right, you want to do a look closer? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to very quickly talk about this European Super League that was mooted in football.
Yes.
Which was just the worst idea. And I'm kind of glad I left it a week, because golf has recently tried to propose something similar, and Rory McIlroy's been against that. I'm not a fan of golf at all, but I am a fan of football. Essentially what it was a bunch of the most powerful and richest teams in the world didn't want to play in the Champions League anymore. They wanted to play in a new competition where they would basically be guaranteed entry every year as founding members, and they would always play against each other. And it's like the idea of these big European clubs playing each other every season would really just remove some of the magic of it. Right, straight up. Liverpool play Barcelona like maybe once every 5 to 10 years or whatever. And then when you add on top this kind of like guaranteed entry, it just... It takes away from the competition element. So it was just a horrible idea all around. And the reason I want to talk about it is because the fan backlash against it really kind of showed what people could do when they come together to support against something that is, unfair and idiotic. And I think that this is something that needs to get applied more in other aspects of life. Specifically, on the same kind of time that this was happening, the trial of one of the police officers who murdered George Floyd was happening. And almost unthinkable, a few years ago, that a police officer would be sentenced for murdering someone in cold blood, essentially. But huge protests have happened over the past year and a bit, that have kind of showed the power of people to change it. And I think, this is a much more important real world application of it. And I just wish that this was something that we could see applied. Yeah, more people use your voice. Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to say on the matter.
Yeah, I mean, speaking specifically of football, part of the brilliant thing about football and sport, and anything that is kind of live entertainment, in a sense, is there's a thrill to it because it could go wrong.
It's so unpredictable.
This is somebody who performed in live theatre, so I'm coming from that perspective as well, that part of the thrill of going to the theatre live is genuinely that somebody might screw up their lines, and there's, it just adds a different element to it, and in that sense, with football there's a thrill that the big teams could lose,
Yeah.
the underdogs come up and they win, and no matter who you support, you love to see that happen. I don't know anybody that at some point, who isn't an Arsenal fan, that at some point hasn't enjoyed the fact that Arsenal has lost
Yeah.
in the last couple of years. And you could say that about, I don't know anybody who's not a Manchester City fan that enjoyed the fact that they didn't win the Premier League last year. It's this idea that the underdogs can win, and these sort of giants of the sport are not always necessarily going to win everything, and they're not always going to dominate. And I think if that power is taken away from, or if that possibility is taken away from the fans, it really highlights actually what sport and football and these forms of entertainment are about, and that is simply that it's entertainment. It's and what do we find entertaining? Do we find watching Man City win the Premier League every year entertaining? I don't particularly. I'm saying that as a Blackburn Rovers fan who will never really get that opportunity again. But
very, very sorry.
But so that for me is, and also in a more kind of broad sense, it's rich people using their money to control the market and to make more money, and to control where it goes.
Yeah, for me, this was the important thing about it. Is it was, working class people, not the rich elites, who kind of came together and with one voice said, "We don't like this. We're gonna stop it."
And they did.
And I think they showed the power of the people, and it's something I want to see more. Even if you just want to stay within football, I want to see more of fans coming together to address kind of the racial harassment that people are receiving on social media, making LGBT people feel more welcome within sport, because that's a huge issue.
Yeah.
Huge issue of trans involvement in sport and people being very against that. I think people have the power to embrace these.
Yeah.
And change things for the better.
Even things like equal opportunity for women in sport.
Yep.
Yeah. There are these issues that lie so deeply embedded in sporting culture that need to be challenged and addressed, and they are so often kind of just ignored.
Yeah.
That I think you make a really great point that this has shed some real light on how much industry in general relies on the customer, how much it relies on the people. And you say that you've given some a really good real world example of the way that it was almost imitated in the wake of George Floyd's death, and I think there's this, at the moment there's so much inequality in the UK. You see it socioeconomically, you see it politically. It's there's a real divide, and I think there's kind of actually some genuine questioning of the nature of protest now.
we've just seen a couple of films which kind of reference very notable protests. We've had Judas and the Black Messiah, we had Trial of the Chicago 7, and the Steve McQueen Small Axe film Mangrove kind of all highlight some very key protests around kind of that era you're talking about as well.
Yeah, and you just don't always see that same revolutionary kind of instinct in protest now. And so I think it's a really kind of interesting time where when you apply that kind of theory to what's happened with the ESL, you know, you're seeing people make huge changes with these a bit slightly more radical forms of protest, or radical protesting. The nature of the protest and what the protest is achieving seems to be...
that was largely online.
Yeah, but the power is online as well now, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's also another way in which protesting and demonstration has changed, is because everything is so much more virtual, and it's more accessible online, that, you know, it just becomes it just naturally, that is the way people communicate now. And yeah, I think that's a really great topic, and a really brilliant interpretation of those events as well.
Yeah, so I don't know how eloquently I put it, but that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. Is it really kind of showed the power that the people have. To bring it back to films, A Bug's Life does the same thing,
which might pop up at some point as well.
Well, you're knocking off those early Pixar, so keep it going. Okay, that'll do it for this week. You can find us on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, YouTube, and some other places. You can follow us at Nostalgia Bubble on Twitter and at Nostalgia Bubble Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. You can follow me everywhere at Shuggy Says on almost all social media platforms. And Night.
You can follow me at Nye Reese on Twitter, NYEREES, and at Reese Nye on Instagram.
And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
See ya.